I hear a lot of people talk about ADHD as being some sort of modern issue, as if our million-year-old brain has suddenly developed some neurological difference because we've got more distractions nowadays. Now, maybe we do have more distractions nowadays, but I doubt it's a 21st century thing. In fact, I want to read you a poem that I found from A.A Milne's book, Now We Are Six. It's from 1927, and there's a story in there called The Old Sailor, and it goes like this. There was once an old sailor, my grandfather knew, who had so many things that he wanted to do, but whenever he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't, because of the state he was in. He was shipwrecked and lived on an island for weeks, and he wanted a hat, and he wanted some breeks, and he wanted some nets or a line and some hooks for the turtles and things which you read of in books. And thinking of this, he remembered a thing which he wanted for water, and that was a spring. And he thought that to talk to he'd look for and keep, if he found it, a goat or some chickens and sheep. Then, because of the weather, he wanted a hut, with a door to come in by, which opened and shut, with a jerk which was useful if snakes were about, and a very strong lock to keep savages out. He began on the fish hooks, and when he'd begun, he decided he couldn't, because of the sun. So he knew what he ought to begin with, and that was to find or to make a large sun-stopping hat. He was making the hat with the leaves from a tree when he thought, I'm as hot as a body can be, and I've nothing to take for my terrible thirst, so I'll look for a spring, and I'll look for it first. Then he thought as he started, oh dear, and oh dear, I'll be lonely tomorrow with nobody here. So he made in his notebook a couple of notes. I must find some chickens, and no, I mean goats. He had just seen a goat, which he knew by the shape, when he thought, but I must have a boat for escape. But a boat means a sail, which means needles and thread, so I better sit down and make needles instead. He began on a needle, but thought as he worked, that if this were an island where savages lurked, sitting safe in his hut he'd have nothing to fear, whereas now they might suddenly breathe in his ear. So he thought of his hut, and he thought of his boat, and his hat, and his breeks, and his chickens and goats, and the hooks for his food, and the spring for his thirst, but he never could think what he ought to do first. And so in the end he did nothing at all, but basked on the shingle wrapped up in a shawl, and I think it was dreadful the way he behaved. He did nothing but basking until he was saved. I think a lot of people with ADHD will recognise themselves in that old sailor there, having so many things that you want to get started, but not actually starting any of them. I hear people say sometimes that ADHD is just an excuse to be lazy. But the difference is, lazy people will only put in 1% effort and they'll achieve 1%. ADHD people will put in 100%, but they'll still only achieve 1%. And the intense frustrations of that often means that it looks like they've just wrapped themselves up in a shawl and sat on a beach waiting to be saved, when actually their brains have been non-stop all day, even if they haven't even moved.